Lauren Mackinion will be talking about the power revealed through the tombs of Pompeii.
I do not have a PowerPoint, so sorry. If you read the little handout they gave you, you'll know that I received my bachelor's degree focusing on history and in art history. So every time I look at the history of a place and a people, I also want to look at their art, because I fully believe that you can't know a person's full history without knowing what was so important to them that they dedicated art to it. So when it was time for me to pick my topic for our Rome paper, I was already writing actually about tombstones for a different class that made me start thinking about tombs in ancient Pompeii and the art that they used to decorate their tombs. And so I narrowed it down to 4 different tombs that have different arts featured on them. But they belong to, I'm going to mispronounce these horribly, and I'm so sorry, Nevalia Tech, Vestorius Priscus, Vesonius Phileros, and Imachia. And I only know that because Olivia said it earlier, so thank you, Olivia. But, so the reason that tombs were so important to the history of Rome was because obviously that's marks the final resting place of your loved ones. But it also was a place for the living to go back, and they had special holidays dedicated specifically for the common, the living people to go back, and they would bring offerings, they'd bring food for these special holidays. They also would visit on the person's birthday and also the date of their death. One holiday that occurred in the month of February, we have actual writings from Ovid that said, quote, "Appease the souls of your fathers and bring small gifts to the tombs erected to them," during the celebration called Parentilia. And he said to leave a tile wreathed with votive garlands, a sprinkling of corn, a few grains of salt, bread soaked in wine, and some loose violets, and to set them on a potsherd and leave it in the middle of the road. And all of the tombs that you will find in Pompeii, you won't typically, you will not find them in the city gates. They're all going to be leading out on the roads outside of the gates. Part of this is according to the 12 Tables law that said a dead man shall not be buried or burned within the city. Donald G. Kyle attributed this probably more to the fact that Romans have religious concerns about pollution within the city's sacred boundaries than from pragmatic concerns about unhygienic contamination and disease. And so that's where you have all the tombs leading out from the city. In most of the cases, neither the location or the decoration of tombs were left up to chance, as they were intended to, quote, call out to passerbyers to stop and consider the life of the person buried there. The epitaph found on the tomb of Publius Vesonius Phileros, for example, literally, quote, calls out to passerbys, as its epitaph translates to, quote, stranger, delay a brief while if it is not troublesome, and learn what to avoid. Which is something that I thought was, if you read that, that would make you want to stop, and then it would be kind of like you're remembering the person, and as long as your memory is alive of this person, then they are alive. The locations of the tombs heavily depended on the social standing of the deceased. The rich you would find more closely to the gates of the tombs, and they would often have they're typically more likely to have a bench for you to actually sit down, and like the one I just read about, for you to sit and actually contemplate the person's life. The poor and the less higher standing would be out more towards, away from the city, following that road. So now I'm going to talk to you about the 4 different art types that I focused on. The first is the art type of carving. The use of scenes carved into the tomb itself to show influence of one family over others in Pompeii is reflected on the altar tomb of Nevalia Tech, a freedwoman. Her tomb employs the use of carving to depict items or events associated with or performed by her husband during his time as a freedman. The tomb was commissioned during her lifetime, seemingly in response to a less impressive tomb built by her husband. One study suggests by Virginia Campbell that her tomb was intended as, quote, a monument to their prosperity for the express use of their former slaves and other members of their extended household. So on his tomb, I don't have pictures, I don't know why I keep looking up there, but his tomb you will find images of a gift that was given to him in his honor for the work that he performed in public service, which was a bench, a theater seat, and there's also, on the other side of it, you will find a ship, which they believe is in reference to his work in maritime, and that's how he would make his money. On the front of it is actually an image of individuals that were coming and they're being fed by food that was made or purchased by this freedman. And at the top of it, I'm sorry, I don't have pictures, the tomb also features the face of a female, and she's looking out directly at anyone who's walking by. It's very eye-catching, and most people do believe that this is Nevelia Tech. By deciding to feature reliefs on the tomb showing all the achievements that her husband made and a depiction of herself, Virginia Campbell believed that this was an attempt by Nevelia Tech to establish an ancestry suitable for generations to honor, as it was a, quote, manifestation of the freedman habit of establishing a lineage for future generations who had full claim to Roman citizenship. Her artistic choices for her tomb ensured that her family's contributions to the community would not go unnoticed or forgotten. It is also possible that by including the group of people on the front of the tomb space, that she was making a statement to those her husband had helped during his lifetime by making them remember everything her husband had done for them. By ensuring that this image was recorded in permanent stone, those who did owe something to her husband might have felt a greater need to visit the tomb and pay their respects and honor the family. The second type of art we'll be looking at, or hearing about, is the use of painting. And this is found in the tomb of Gaius Vistorius Priscus. In addition to giving the details of how his tomb and the location were paid for, the epitaph on his tomb reads, quote, to Gaius Vistorius Priscus, I.O. He lived 22 years. In his tomb, you will find many different depictions of his life and his belongings that give you a glimpse into his privileged lifestyle. One of the depictions is of gladiators, which can be either attributed to possibly games that he supported or games that took place during his funeral service. There's also a painting that has silver plates and cups and dining ware, and this could have been as a reference to, like, it's the meals I mentioned beforehand, where people would come and they'd have meals at the graveside. Or it could have just been, hey, look at all this great stuff I owned. In addition to the artwork that showed his physical wealth and the honor bestowed to him, there's also the depiction of him doing his job as an idol. As his mother is the one who paid for the tomb itself, it makes sense that she'd want her son's legacy and achievements to be remembered. The scenes she chose to be painted for his tomb present the idea of a promising life in the public arena of Pompeii cut short. The inclusion of his work as an idol in his tomb preserves the image of Gaius Vistorius Priscus performing his public work for eternity. Anyone who would have visited the tomb would have been confronted immediately with an image and an atmosphere of a powerful young man whose life had been cut much too short. The third type of art we will be hearing about is the use of statues and epitaphs, inscriptions. This will be found on the tomb of Publius, I cannot say his name, Publius Visonius Phileros. On his tomb, there are 3 statues that are full length. As one historian said, Mary Baird, she said, full-length statues of all 3 of them sadly missing their heads, still looking down at passerby from a nick on the upper story of the facade. So in addition to having these 3 statues that would have been peering down at you as you walked by, there was also inscriptions found on the tomb. They record his freed status, so you know that this was a freedman, and They record his social standing, which, funny enough, he had this commission during his lifetime. So he was alive, he had every single input into it. And after he had already had his inscription written, he received a new title of power, and he had to go back and it's squeezed in at the very top. So he wanted you to know, like, hey, I'm still doing some pretty important stuff. But one of the unique things about this tomb is not just him talking about all the great things that he's done in his life. There is actually a second inscription that the historian Joanne Barry described as being added to the tomb later that recorded some sort of legal dispute where it appears that his friend, whose statue is one of the three featured on the front of the tomb, had accused him of some felony, but Fesonius, the owner of the tomb, had been found innocent of the charges. He had obviously only wanted the best to be remembered about him, and to make sure that his name, and therefore the name of his descendants, was clear and spotless for all eternity, he left no room for rumors to circulate about his standing after his death. The fourth and final image of art that we will be learning about, is the use of architecture. And as Olivia has already spoken about, Immacia has one of the it's recorded as the largest tomb that has been discovered in the city of Pompeii. The unique thing about Immacia's tomb, it has a sitting area, it's raised up above street level, so it has a large amount of area for multiple people to come and sit at and think about her and her life. But it doesn't really say anything. Most of the art has been plundered away. There's only about one left, and it has an Amazon fight. And the only thing that really says is her father's name and her name. It doesn't say anything about what she's done. And in part, most people believe that it's because she had her building her temple. Her epitaph, much like the artwork chosen for her tomb, tells nothing about her life. All the information known specifically about her comes from an inscription found in her building in the Forum, which gives the name of her son, her role as a public priestess, and the name of her father. The lack of description of her life achievements on her tomb could mean that, according to Virginia Campbell, quote, she meant for her great building in the Forum to serve as a monument to her life, and therefore chose to keep the inscription on her tomb quite simple, due to the idea, quote, that most visitors to Pompeii would eventually find their way to the Forum. So Immacia's name and deeds, as inscribed on her building, would have been visible to more people than her tomb would have ever been. Of the 4 tombs observed, there were 2 built by freedmen and freedwomen, and the other 2 were built by women who either held important influence in Pompeii or related to men who did. The tombs of Nevalia Tech, Victorius Priscus, and Publius Fesonius Philarus all present depictions of themselves along with the titles or that of their family members. A difference that separates the 3 tombs from Immacia's could be the fact that the first 3 did not have a tangible building or monument that tell of their life deeds, whereas Immacia had her building in the Forum. With this in mind, they most likely poured all their ambitions into their monuments to prove they had done something with their lives. The same could be said of his Priscus' tomb, as he was too young to have made as much of a contribution as Immacia. As of 2015, Virginia Campbell reported that approximately 200 tombs and burial areas have been excavated. And this is partially because they don't really think about looking beyond the city walls. And as Dr. Lowe said, it's only been recently that excavations have picked back up again. But I believe that it's still mainly focused within the walls. And so it's one of those things where we have to take what was discovered and go from there. Despite the lack of access to all of the tombs and burial places of ancient Pompeii, stories of the lives lived in Pompeii are still evident through the tombs that have been recovered. Each piece of decoration and layout of the individual tombs give a perceived intimate insight into the lives of people who commissioned them. The 4 tombs observed each tell a story of their occupant's life, or at least the version they wanted the public to remember. None of the tombs feature pieces of either art or inscriptions that relate disagreeable things they did, or even unfortunate things that happened to them. The one exception is, of course, the inclusion of the claim leveled against Publius Vesonius Philos, which he chose to have featured on his tombstone, but only with the outcome being favorable in his name and making sure to include that he was cleared. They each act as a primary document concerning the people of Pompeii, even if they don't tell the entire story. The way that the people of ancient Pompeii lived their lives, what they valued, and how they wished for themselves to be remembered by their descendants and visitors manifest themselves in the decorations they chose for their tombs. In this sense, the way that the deceased wished to be remembered during the days of ancient Pompeii are still relatable to the tombstones found today in our graveyards and cemeteries. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
You remind me of what Olivia and Kate said earlier. It's quite striking that the tombs you picked are by free ex-slaves and by women. Do you think there's an element that the Mackinion is so exceptional because she has her building that the free men would be celebrated in government inscriptions, government public buildings, whereas women and ex-slaves didn't have access to that. So they take a tomb that's private, that's theirs, and build up their status that way, because that's something they have control of, when they're never beyond it.
I think that that is most likely the case, because that's something that you see, I think, not just in Pompeii, but throughout history, where the people who may not have had as much control over their daily lives, even if it is at the very end of their life, they want to have something left behind. And that's a very human concept, is we want to be remembered. We don't want people to forget us, that we were important. And especially in the case of the freed women who maybe they weren't able to own a business, but they certainly were there working and helping their spouse. As in the case of with her husband, he built a tomb first, but it was very what she considered bland. And she was like, no, we need to have this and remind people of all the stuff that we were able to achieve. And even to the point of most probably having her face put on it and saying, don't forget us, don't forget me. So I think that's a very possible reason for how they chose to be remembered. Any other questions? Yes.
Did the Romans have any kind of custom like the later Christians did of veneration of tombs or shrines where you pilgrim sites where you go visit the tomb of some important person?
I know that Alexander the Great, they like to have pilgrimages too. But as far as beyond that, I'm sure that great leaders they most likely would have, if they would have been allowed to get close to them. I don't know, there might have been guards posted. But I know that for sure Alexander the Great, until his tomb was lost to history, I know that there was many records of people specifically making pilgrimages to his tomb.
Augustus Caesar visited the tomb, jabbed the nose and broke Alexander's nose. There's the first barbaric tourist.
Don't do that. Don't break off stuff when you go to historic places.